situationally bound utterance. Now, in my own perspective, the difference between those two is not very big at all. So it's the only difference is that it's terms that fit into terminological frameworks. Whereas where on the one hand, Jacob May is very much concentrating on the social impact of utterances, whereas on the other hand, Etchkesch's theory is basically oriented towards cognition, but within that theory of cognition, he also recognizes that situational context is very important, and that is why he brings up this notion of situationally bound utterances. So just to indicate that his theory of cognition behind language use is not purely cognitive as in the head, but cognition that is situated within situational contexts as well. So there is not really very much significantly different about what they are talking about. It's only that they use different terminologies because of the different theoretical frameworks from which they start. I don't know whether that's enough as an answer to this question. So if you have any more questions, okay, they can be very easily on the screen and I can try to answer.
Thank you, Prof. I mean, so now what I can actually infer from Prof's response is what I've called they need to conceptualize and contextualize those theories. Are we together? You conceptualize and contextualize. That you bring those theories and then. No. The point is. No, you are fine. No, he explained that. He explained that the first number one is going to be difficult. I said, so not something new. If I got Prof right, you have to merge with the one you already know. I wrote this down. So they look like a series, but there's a philosophy behind it, and you can. That is why it's very difficult now for people to. You must go. Literature or literature. My question also is that how will that now? Because as soon as if I come up with this, and
okay, so the question that I see now is, can one do Pragma semiotic analysis of a text? Well, the answer is very clearly yes, of course, because, well, okay, again, it is a matter of what kinds of traditions that you come from. In my view of pragmatics, pragmatics is basically the science of language use. It is as general as that. Now, the field of semiotics is the science of signs. So, and the use of signs, and language is one type of sign. So, pragmatics, in a very real sense, is, if you look at from a broader point of view, pragmatics is a field of semiotics, which is in fact also the way in which the field of pragmatics originally was defined by Charles Morris when he started to make the distinction between syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. Well, this was for him, for Charles Morris, he was working on a theory of signs in general. So in fact, and the difference between syntax, semantics, and pragmatics was that syntax is the study of the relationship between signs. Semantics is the relationship between signs and what they refer to. And pragmatics is the study of the relationship between signs and their use. Now, if you look at the history of pragmatics from that point of view, then very obviously, yes, pragmatics is in itself a kind of semiotic enterprise. So there is so definitely the answer to this question must be yes. Okay. And then the addition to that question was here: what are supposed to be, what is supposed to be looked for in the text? Well, that is a very general question, and the only answer to that can be a very general one. So you have to look in a text for everything that you can find in a text. So you have to look for the way in which the text is part of an activity type, situated in a specific kind of context with all the parameters that are involved. You have to look at all the structural properties, and you have then to look at what this combination of context and structure yields in terms of meaning. So it's as general as that. And then you can only start from there to start specifying more specific things that you want to look at, because you can never study everything at the same time. So you have to somehow, for a specific kind of investigation, you have to restrict yourself to a specific aspect or a specific number of aspects. But the range that is possible is in principle without end, which makes it, of course, a very difficult field to be in. But that's what it is like. I don't know if that's a satisfactory answer for you. So I'm getting a third question here. What are the basic issues in any kind of pragmatic analysis? What mainly characterizes a pragmatic analysis? Well, in my view of pragmatics, so what language use is all about is the dynamics with which meanings get interactively generated. So the way in which meanings also get negotiated. And that is the very core of what we have to be concerned with. Now, you may ask the question, well, okay, if you want to focus on meaning, what is the difference with semantics? Now, for me personally, the entire question of the difference between semantics and pragmatics is not a very relevant one. If you want to push the difference, then you can use as a rule of thumb, you can say, well, semantics is concerned with meaning without taking into account context, whereas pragmatics is dealing with meaning in context. And that's a useful rule of thumb to use, but it does not tell you everything, because if you go back to the literature on meaning, so for instance, there is this article by John Searle on literal meaning, in which he uses the following kind of example. So he uses as an example a sentence such as, "The cat is on the mat." You could say, well, that's a very simple sentence, which you can analyze semantically, and you don't need much pragmatics for that. But the argument that Searle makes is, well, even a sentence like that, you can, of course, try to look purely at its propositional content, but you cannot understand what this sentence means without bringing in all kinds of contextual elements, such as you cannot understand the sentence, "The cat is on the mat," without bringing in your notions of gravity, which will clearly tell you that if somebody uses that kind of sentence, it is not a cat that is hanging on a mat against the ceiling. No, the mat is on the floor and the cat is on top of it, and all of this because of gravity. Now, okay, so the extent to which context comes in is a gradual phenomenon, and you can try to eliminate it for certain purposes of semantic analysis. But in general, if you talk about meaning, well, you do have to take context into account, even for certain types of semantic analysis, even if you start looking for literal forms of meaning, which at first sight do not have to do too much with context. So everything that is involved in the dynamics of creating meanings, well, that is the core of what you have to look at in the field of pragmatics. So I see another question popping up here. And that question is, in what ways can we develop local theory for pragmatic analysis of discourse? Um, um, can someone try to explain to me what you mean by local theories? Well, I was not meaning to generate laughter, but well, I see that somebody is still typing, and so maybe an answer to my question will be coming up soon. But okay, I'm just trying to imagine in the meantime what it is that you mean by local theories, and I can imagine something. Well, okay, I see it popping up. Indigenous knowledge born out of indigenous concepts. Now, that is a very important thing because the you may remember that in the presentation that I gave yesterday, or that was shown to you yesterday, I pointed out the centrality of language to every form of. Now, it is also the case, and I want to refer to this to a piece of literature that is probably easily accessible, namely Peter Winch, who in the 1950s wrote a very little book, which was entitled "The Idea of Philosophy and Its Relation to Society." Um, now, the in this book, what he says is there is no way in which you can understand social action without understanding the concepts in terms of which the action in question is understood by the people involved in it. And as a very simple example for that, you can say, well, okay, as a sociologist, you can try and travel to India and to study the caste system. And in your luggage as a sociologist, there will be the concepts of class and of mobility. And you may be coming back from India and saying, well, okay, I found it. Caste is class without mobility. But then, by giving that kind of definition, you have not yet understood what the caste system is all about, because there is a lot of stuff surrounding it in terms of religious principles of purity, division of labor, and so on and so forth, which, if you do not grasp the notions in terms of which it is understood by the people involved in the social contexts in question, then you have not understood what is happening there. And social action, well, linguistic action, speech, verbal action,